My name is Olivia. I'm 39 now, but this story starts when I was 34, on a day that began with sunshine and ended with the complete collapse of my world. I discovered that my husband and my own mother were having an affair and had been stealing my inheritance for years. Their plan was to leave me with nothing, confident I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong. Before we dive into the wreckage and the rebuilding, I just want to say thank you for being here to listen. It means more than you know. I see people tuning in from all over the world. It's comforting to know we're all connected, no matter the distance. So please, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your presence here gives me strength. Now, let me take you back to that crisp October afternoon, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of my life. The school bell had just rung, its cheerful, metallic clang echoing the bright, cloudless sky. It was one of those perfect autumn days in Ohio, where the air is crisp and everything seems painted and gold and crimson. My son, Mason, who was 11 at the time, came bounding out of the red brick building, his backpack bouncing with an energy I both admired and envied. He had my late father's smile, a wide, genuine curve that could make even the gloomiest day feel a little brighter. "Hey, Mom, can we get ice cream?" he asked, sliding into the passenger seat of our sensible Honda Accord. Mrs. Davidson gave us a pop quiz in history, and I totally aced it. "Of course we can," I said, smiling as I buckled my seatbelt. "A-plus work deserves an A-plus treat. But first, I was thinking we could surprise Grandma Diane with a visit. I haven't talked to her all day, and I want to tell her your good news." Mason groaned, a theatrical sound that only a preteen on the cusp of coolness can perfect. "Do we have to? She just pinches my cheeks and asks if I have a girlfriend in front of everyone." I laughed. A light, genuine sound that felt alien to me now. "That's how she shows love, sweetie. You know she's proud of you." At least that's what I'd been telling myself for 34 years. My mother's love was a complex thing, often tangled with criticism and backhanded compliments, but I had learned to navigate it to find the affection buried beneath the surface. My mother, Diane, lived in the same small, blue-shuttered house she'd lived in my whole life, the house that my father had worked 2 jobs to pay for. It was a place of memories, of scraped knees and birthday cakes, of my father's booming laugh and the scent of my mother's pot roast. As we turned onto her quiet, tree-lined street, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach for no reason I could name, and then I saw it. Parked in her driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was a vehicle that had no business being there. My husband Eric's mud-splattered Ford F-150. "That's weird," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The car was his kingdom, a mobile office of sawdust, blueprints, and the lingering scent of coffee. "Dad's truck is here." "Maybe he's fixing something for Grandma," Mason suggested, already absorbed in a game on his phone, oblivious to the cold dread creeping up my spine. He was right. It could be that simple. Eric was a contractor. He was handy. But he was supposed to be across town managing a kitchen remodel for the Hendersons. He'd kissed me goodbye that morning, a quick, familiar peck, and said he wouldn't be home until late. My mother knew his schedule. So why was he here, in the middle of a workday, without either of them mentioning it? A dozen innocent explanations flashed through my mind, but none of them felt right. I parked across the street, my hands suddenly slick on the steering wheel. "You know what, honey? Let's make this a real surprise. Let's sneak up to the back and tap on the kitchen window. We'll make them both jump." Mason, now thrilled by the prospect of a little mischief, pocketed his phone. "Yeah, let's scare him." We tiptoed across the street, our sneakers silent on the pavement. We slipped down the side of the house, the familiar, sweet scent of my mother's prize-winning rose bushes filling the air. It was a scent I'd always associated with safety, with home. By the time this day was over, it would smell only of rot and decay. The kitchen window was cracked open to let in the autumn breeze, and as we got closer, their voices drifted out, as clear as the afternoon sky. It was my mother speaking first, her voice laced with a familiar, weary complaint that I had always mistaken for concern. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending, Eric. Every time she calls with some little problem, every time she comes over with that sad-eyed look, I just want to scream. My blood ran cold. My hand, which had been raised to tap on the glass, froze in midair. I quickly put a finger to my lips, signaling to Mason to stay absolutely quiet. His eyes were wide, confused. He didn't understand the nuance, the venom. I was beginning to, and the understanding was a physical pain, a shard of glass working its way into my chest. Then came Eric's voice, my husband's voice, low and conspiratorial, a tone I had never heard him use before. I know, babe. Believe me, I know. She's so needy, so broken. It's draining just being in the same room with her sometimes. Babe? The pet name struck me with the force of a slap. That was his name for me. Well, you're the one who married her, Diane said, her tone sharp and devoid of any motherly warmth. I always knew she was too damaged for a man like you, too sensitive. I did what I had to do, Eric shot back. Her old man wouldn't have left her a penny if she wasn't settled down with a good man. We needed that life insurance money. But it's almost gone, Di. Another 6 months, maybe a year, and the college fund we were managing will be dry. The college fund. The $200,000. My inheritance. My father, on his birthday at the local hospital, had gripped my hand, his own hand frail and cold, and told me, this is for you and Mason, to give you a start. Eric's a good man. He'll help you manage it. Eric had been the picture of solemn support, setting up the investment account, telling me it was better to have it professionally managed to make it grow for Mason's future. All this time, I thought I was being a responsible parent. All this time, they had been bleeding it dry. So, what's the plan? Diane asked, and I could hear the clink of ice in a glass. When are you finally going to file the divorce papers and leave her? Soon, Eric said, and I heard him sigh. A sigh of profound weariness that seemed obscene in its intimacy with my mother. Her? She'll cry. That's all she ever does. She's so pathetic, so weak and broken. She won't even fight back.
The world went silent. The chirping of birds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, my own breathing, it all ceased. In that vacuum, I looked down at my son. His face was pale, his lower lip trembling as he stared at me, his innocent eyes asking a question I couldn't possibly answer. I grabbed his hand, my grip like iron, and pulled him away from the window, away from the poison. We backed away silently, retreating through the roses that now seemed to have thorns of pure malice. We got in the car, and I drove, my movements stiff and robotic. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I was leaving one life behind. And, though I didn't know it yet, driving toward a battle I never, ever thought I'd have to fight. The drive home was a silent movie filmed in shades of gray. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes locked on the road, but the familiar streets of our neighborhood were a blur. All I could see was the image of my husband's truck in my mother's driveway. All I could hear was their laughter replaying in a torturous loop inside my skull. Each chuckle, each dismissive word was a new cut. Needy, broken, pathetic, babe. We pulled into our own driveway, in front of the little Cape Cod house that I thought was our sanctuary. It now felt like a stage, the set of a very cruel play where I was the unknowing fool. The cheerful yellow front door seemed to mock me. As I turned off the ignition, the engine died with a final shuddering sigh, and the silence in the car became absolute, heavy and suffocating. It was finally broken by a small, trembling voice from the passenger seat. "Mom," Mason asked, his voice cracking with an emotion he was too young to name. Why did Dad and Grandma say those things about you? Did you do something wrong?" His question, so innocent, so heartbreaking, sliced through my numbness. He thought I was at fault. Of course he did. He was a child, and these were the two other most important adults in his life. The poison was already working. I turned to look at him, really look at him. His face, usually so full of life and mischief, was crumpled with a pain and confusion that mirrored my own. He wasn't just a witness. He was a victim, a pawn in their disgusting game. They weren't just betraying me, they were poisoning his world, shattering his trust in the very people who were supposed to protect him. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The shards of my broken heart, which had been rattling around in my chest, didn't disappear. They began to fuse together, not into a mended heart that could be broken again, but into something hard and sharp. A weapon. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice hoarse but shockingly steady. "I didn't do anything wrong. They did." I reached over and squeezed his hand, and I'm going to find out why. That night was the longest of my life. I went through the motions of our evening routine on autopilot. I put a frozen pizza in the oven, my hands moving with a strange detachment. I helped Mason with his math homework, staring at fractions and percentages while my mind grappled with the terrifying calculus of my own life. I put him to bed, reading him an extra chapter of his fantasy book, my voice never wavering even as my insides churned and twisted. After he was asleep, I walked through the quiet house, a ghost in my own life. Every photograph on the wall felt like a lie. There was our wedding picture, me looking up at Eric with such naive adoration, convinced he was my knight in shining armor. There was a framed photo from last Christmas, me standing between my husband and my mother, a happy family for the camera. A total fabrication. I took it down from the wall and stared at it, tracing the smiling faces with my finger. The woman in the picture was a stranger to me now, a trusting fool I no longer recognized. I went into my home office, a small room where I paid the bills and organized our lives, and the carefully constructed dam inside me finally broke. The sheer weight of the betrayal pressed down on me, and I couldn't breathe. My chest grew tight, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. A full-blown panic attack. The room started to spin. I stumbled into the adjoining bathroom, knelt on the cold tile floor, and gasped for air that wouldn't come. My vision narrowed to a dark tunnel. This was it. This was what they wanted. This was the weak, broken Olivia they knew, collapsing in a heap on the floor. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for my phone on the vanity. My fingers were clumsy, numb. I scrolled to the one name I knew I could trust. Clara. My best friend from college, the godmother to my son, the one person who had always seen me for me, not for who I was in relation to anyone else. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Liv, what's up?" I opened my mouth to speak, but all that came out was a strangled sob, a sound of pure agony. Her tone changed instantly, from cheerful to alarmed. "Liv, what is it? What's wrong? Are you okay? Is Mason okay? Tell me what's happening." I couldn't form the words. I couldn't articulate the sheer, monstrous nature of the betrayal. It was too ugly. I just cried, guttural, agonizing sounds that were ripped from a place of primal pain. "Olivia, listen to me," Krala said, her voice firm now, cutting through my hysteria. "I don't know what's going on, but you sound terrified. Is it Eric? Did he do something?" I managed a choked, "Yes." Okay, listen to me. Pack a bag for you and Mason, just the essentials, your wallet, your phones, a change of clothes. Get in the car and get out of there. Go to a hotel. Come to my place. I don't care, but get out of there. Money, the house, everything else, we can figure that out later. Your safety, Mason's safety, that's all that matters right now. Her words, meant to be helpful, sparked a flicker of something else inside me. Defiance. Run? Hide in the middle of the night? That's exactly what they expected. They had already written my script for me. I would cry, I would crumble, and I would eventually accept my fate as a victim. Leaving now would be an admission of defeat before the war had even begun. It would prove them right. The gasping breaths began to slow down. The roaring in my ears subsided to a hum. I pushed myself up from the floor, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the sink. I looked at the reflection in the mirror. My face was blotchy, my eyes swollen and red. I looked broken. But for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something else in their depths. It wasn't strength. Not yet. It was rage. A cold, clear, calculating rage. "No," I whispered to my reflection. Then louder into the phone, "No." "No?" Clara sounded confused. "What do you mean no? Liv, you're scaring me." "I'm not running, Clara," I said, my voice shockingly calm, all trace of hysteria gone. "If I run, they win. They get everything they want, and they get to be right about me." I took a deep, steadying breath. They think I'm weak. They think I'll just cry and give up. They're about to find out how wrong they are.
I ended the call, promising Clara I was safe and that I would explain everything soon.
I knew she was worried, but I couldn't afford to be swayed by her fear or my own. I walked back into the living room and picked up the framed photograph of the three of us. I looked at their smiling faces, my husband and my mother, and I made a silent vow. I would not be erased. I would not be a footnote in their sordid little story. I would be the author of its final, devastating chapter. Panic is a fire that consumes you, leaving you scorched and empty. But once the flames die down, what's left is often a landscape of stark, undeniable clarity. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., before the sun, not from a nightmare, but with a chilling sense of purpose. The woman who cried on the bathroom floor was gone, at least for now. She was packed away in a small, dark box in the back of my mind. In her place was a librarian. And what do librarians do? They research, they gather information, they find the facts, they organize them, and they build a case. My life had become the most important research project I would ever undertake. My first move wasn't to a lawyer. That would come later. My first move was to the 24-hour pharmacy on the other side of town. At 5 a.m., under the buzzing, humming fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, I bought a cheap, prepaid burner phone and a cash card. No paper trail, no link to my name or my bank accounts. Back home, while the house was still dark and silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, I used my son's school laptop to create a new anonymous email address. Something generic, unmemorable, plain, invisible. This was my new headquarters, my digital war room. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Eric and I had shared thousands of meals, and I began my real work. My fingers, usually reserved for tapping out library book codes and helping patrons find information, flew across the keyboard with a newfound urgency. I didn't search for what to do when your husband is cheating with your mother. The pain of that was a constant humming background noise, a migraine I had to learn to function with. Instead, I typed in cold, practical, actionable terms. Signs of financial abuse in a marriage. How to legally gather evidence of adultery in Ohio. Tracing stolen inheritance money. Fiduciary duty of a spouse. Page after page, article after article, I read. I devoured legal blogs, forum posts from women in similar situations, and articles about forensic accounting. I learned that my state was a no-fault divorce state, which meant the affair itself, while devastating, wouldn't dramatically change the financial settlement in a standard case. But fraud, embezzlement from a dedicated college fund, conspiracy, that was different. That was a crime. The word felt powerful on my tongue, a solid, heavy thing. Crime. By the time the first pale light of dawn streamed through the kitchen window, I had a multi-tabbed browser full of information and a handwritten list on a legal pad. A plan. It was terrifying, but it was mine. I found Sarah Walsh's name on the legal form for women. She wasn't one of the smiling lawyers on billboards or bus benches. Her reviews were different, and they were exactly what I was looking for. They used words like relentless, methodical, unflappable, and a shark in a skirt. One former client wrote, "She doesn't hold your hand or give you tissues. She builds a fortress around you and hands you the cannon." That was what I needed. Not a shoulder to cry on, but an arsenal. Using my new burner phone, I called her office the moment they opened at 9 a.m. I scheduled a consultation, paying the hefty fee with my cash card. I gave her assistant my new anonymous email address for all correspondence. The hardest part of that day, and all the days that followed, was the performance. When Eric came downstairs yawning and stretching, I was making pancakes, just like any other Tuesday. The smell of buttermilk and melting butter filled the air, a sickeningly wholesome scent for such a rotten morning. "Morning," he said, kissing the top of my head. The gesture, once a comfort, now felt like the cold, dry touch of a snake. I had to use every ounce of self-control not to flinch or recoil. "Morning," I replied, my voice miraculously light. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Like a log," he said, grabbing the orange juice from the fridge. "Long day yesterday. These clients are running me ragged." "I bet," I said, flipping a pancake with a steady hand. "We missed you at dinner." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face placid, my movements unhurried.
I was an actress in the most important role of my life, and my audience of one was a man I now knew to be a consummate liar. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, living a double life. In one, I was the devoted, slightly tired wife and mother. I packed Eric's lunch. I signed Mason's permission slips. I called my mother to ask about her doctor's appointment, my voice dripping with a daughterly concern that was pure acid in my throat. Every lie I told, every moment of false affection I feigned, was a brick I laid in the foundation of my strategy. It was emotionally exhausting, a constant exercise in self-control that left me drained by the end of each day. But the real work happened in the shadows, after everyone had slept. I started gathering my own evidence. I went through years of bank statements, which I'd always left for Eric to handle because he'd told me he was better with numbers. I downloaded every single one to a password-protected flash drive I hid in a hollowed-out book in my closet. I found the statements for the college fund. Just as he'd said through the window, the balance was dwindling at a rapid rate. There were huge cash withdrawals, always just under the federal reporting limit, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. My father's legacy, Mason's future, was being siphoned off for their dinners, their weekends away, their secret life. And then I found it. The smoking gun. A recurring transfer. $5,000 every other month for the last 2 years. The destination account wasn't under a name I recognize. It was just a string of numbers. But with a little more digging through old insurance paperwork I found in a dusty box in the attic, I found a match. It was a joint savings account. The account holders were listed clearly in the fine print of an old policy document. Eric R. Pedersen and Diane L. Albright. My husband and my mother. I stared at the screen, the black and white letters blurring. This wasn't just them stealing from me. This was a joint venture, a business plan. They had a shared account, a financial partnership built on my betrayal. The thought was so grotesque, so profoundly violating that I had to physically clap my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming and waking my son. I saved the document to my flash drive. I cleared the browser history. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. The librarian in me was meticulous. No evidence of my search would be left behind. I now had the what, the how, and the who. When I walked into Sarah Walsh's office 2 days later, I wasn't coming as a crying victim asking what to do. I was coming as a client, with my first file of exhibits already prepared, asking her how to win. The game was afoot. The performance of normalcy was the most grueling part of my new life. It was a constant, exhausting act of theater. Every morning, I'd have to put on my mask before I even left the bedroom. I'd smile at Eric over coffee, ask about his day, and listen to his fabricated stories of stress on the job site or difficult clients. The man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, was a stranger. And living with him was like sharing a cage with a predator who thought I was still tame and toothless. My days at the library became my sanctuary. The quiet, the order, the scent of old paper and binding glue. It was a world that made sense, a world governed by rules and systems. But even there, I was working on my case. During my lunch break, I'd sit in my car in the far corner of the parking lot with my burner phone, researching legal precedents, my mind a whir of terms like fiduciary duty, discovery process, and embezzlement. I was arming myself with knowledge, the only weapon I felt I truly possessed. A week into my secret investigation, I made a mistake. A stupid, reckless mistake, born from a moment of emotional exhaustion. We were sitting at the dinner table, Mason chattering on about a science project involving a model volcano. Eric was complaining about the rising cost of lumber, a familiar refrain. On the credit card statement I'd reviewed the night before, I'd seen a charge for a hotel 2 towns over, the Oakwood Inn, on a date he was supposedly working late at the Henderson job. The charge was for a suite. Without thinking, the words slipped out, fueled by a sudden, sharp spike of anger. "Things must be tough," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I saw a charge on the visa from the Oakwood Inn. Was that for a client meeting? Seems like a fancy place to be talking about 2x4s. Silence. The clatter of Mason's fork against his plate was suddenly, deafeningly loud. Eric stopped chewing. He slowly put down his knife and fork, his eyes narrowing on me. It was a subtle shift, but in our new silent war, it was as loud as a gunshot. The predator had just heard a twig snap. Oakwood Inn, he said, his voice dangerously smooth, a stark contrast to his usual jovial tone. Yeah, had to meet a potential client there. He was passing through town from the city, likes the finer things. Why do you ask, Liv? Since when do you go through the credit card statements? I thought that was my job. Oh, no reason, I said quickly, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped drum. I tried to make my laugh sound casual, unconcerned. The bill was on the counter. I just glanced at it. Just never heard of the place. Seemed pricey. You have to spend money to make money, Liv, he said, picking up his fork again. But he wasn't looking at his food. He was looking at me, his gaze analytical and cold. For the first time in our entire marriage, I saw something in his eyes beyond the easygoing charm he presented to the world. I saw a flicker of cold, hard calculation. You've been quiet lately, he added, a casual observation that felt like a pointed interrogation. Everything okay with you? Just tired, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it would crack my face. Long days at the library. We're doing a big inventory. The conversation moved on, but the tension remained, a thick, unspoken thing in the air between us. I had tipped my hand. I had shown him that I was looking at the finances, something I had trustingly left to him for a decade. It was a small thing, but in a game of secrets, a small thing could be fatal. The next few days were a quiet, nerve-shredding hell. Eric became more attentive, but not in a loving way. It was the attentiveness of a watchman, a guard. He'd ask me specific questions about my day, who I had lunch with. He'd coincidentally call me during my lunch break, his voice a little too cheerful, asking what I was up to. He was checking on me, testing my story. I felt a constant prickling sense of being observed, and I had to force myself to act naturally, to be the boring, predictable wife he thought he knew. My mistake had scared me, but it also taught me a valuable lesson. They were arrogant, but they weren't stupid. I had to be smarter. I had to be flawless. The experience solidified my resolve. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed professionals. I needed the shark. Sarah Walsh's office was on the top floor of a sleek glass building downtown that scraped the sky. It was intimidating, all cool gray tones, brushed steel, and abstract art that looked angry. It was a place of power designed to make you feel small. Sarah herself was exactly as advertised. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense haircut that looked like it could cut glass. She didn't offer me tea or platitudes. She offered me a chair and said, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. Omissions are lies, and I don't work with liars." I spent an hour laying out the story, my voice even, my hands folded calmly in my lap on top of the file I had brought. I didn't cry. I presented the facts, the timeline, the overheard conversation, my discovery of the joint account. I told her about my near-fatal mistake of mentioning the hotel. When she finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze unwavering, her fingers steepled under her chin. I expected judgment or pity. Instead, I saw a flicker of something that looked like professional respect. "You were right to be scared," she said finally. "Your slip-up put them on alert. That was a rookie mistake. But it also gives us an advantage. They'll be watching for you to make another emotional mistake. They won't be watching for a calculated, strategic assault. Most people in your position are victims, reacting to events. We are not going to be victims. We are going to be predators." The word felt right. It felt strong. It was the opposite of broken, the opposite of weak.
What you've gathered is a good start, she continued, taking my file, but it's circumstantial. We need more. We need undeniable, third-party proof of both the affair and the coordinated financial fraud. We need to build a case so airtight that by the time we're done, they won't have a leg to stand on in divorce court or, more importantly, criminal court. She leaned forward, her eyes like chips of granite. So here's what we do. You are going to go back to being the perfect, unsuspecting wife. More than that, you're going to be a little bit more of what they expect. A little sad, a little overwhelmed. Let them think your brief suspicion has fizzled out into resignation. Let them get comfortable again. And while you do that, we bring in the expert. She picked up her phone. I'm going to make a call. His name is Mr. Evans. He's the best private investigator in the state, and he's about to become your husband's shadow. Mr. Evans was not what I expected. When you think of a private investigator, you picture a gruff trench coat man from an old black and white movie, someone cynical and world-weary. Mr. Evans was a quiet, almost gentle grandfatherly man in his late 60s with kind, crinkly eyes and a slight limp he didn't try to hide. He wore a simple windbreaker and comfortable-looking sneakers. He looked more like a retired history teacher on his way to a bird-watching expedition than a man who trafficked in secrets and lies. We met in a quiet corner of a nondescript coffee shop a few towns over, a place chosen by him for its anonymity and multiple exits.
Sarah Walsh had already briefed him, so we dove right in after he bought me a cup of tea. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice soft but firm, holding a surprising amount of authority. "Sarah tells me you're in a difficult situation. I want you to know I've handled many cases like this before. It's a sad specialty of mine." He paused, stirring his own coffee with a small plastic stick. "Before I retired from the force, I worked in the financial crimes unit. I saw a lot of what we called romance fraud and, more often, elder abuse. Good people, trusting people, taken for everything by those they loved most. It's a special kind of evil, betraying trust like that. It takes a certain kind of person." His words resonated deep within me. He wasn't just taking a job. He understood the profound violation. He saw the special kind of evil I was facing. It wasn't just about money. It was about the desecration of love and family. For the first time, I felt I had an ally who didn't just see a legal case, but a moral crusade. This unassuming man was my second piece of artillery, right alongside the formidable Sarah Walsh. I gave him everything I had: Eric's work schedules, photos of him and my mother, license plate numbers, and the locations of their favorite restaurants they frequented with clients. I felt like a spy master, a role so alien to my library sensibilities that it was almost dizzying. I was provided intelligence for a covert operation. "This is excellent," he said, tucking my notes into a discreet, plain manila folder. "You've done good work, Mrs. Peterson. You have a knack for this. Now, your job is the hardest part. You do nothing. You go back to your life. You go to the library, you take your son to soccer practice, you make dinner. You let your husband think he got away with his little scare and that you've retreated back into your shell. The more boring and predictable you are, the more comfortable they'll get. And comfort," he said with a knowing look, "makes people incredibly careless." So, I became boring. I became predictable. I became wallpaper. I perfected the art of the placid smile and the vacant, slightly sad stare. I was the very picture of the defeated wife they imagined me to be. All the while, Mr. Evans was a ghost in the machine. He sent encrypted emails to my secret account every few days from a generic address. They were brief, professional, and devastating. Subject: Update 1024. Target A left Henderson worksite at 2:15 p.m. Arrived at Target B's residence at 2:40 p.m. His vehicle remained at the location for 3 hours. No other activity. Subject: Financials. 1026.
Targets A and B visited the Aston Town Center Mall at 7 p.m. Entered an upscale jewelry store. Target A made a significant purchase via credit card. Bag from Finley Jewelers was observed. Each email was a fresh stab of pain, a new confirmation of their treachery. But each one was also a piece of steel being forged for my armor. He attached photographs that made my stomach churn and my hand shake. There was a picture of Eric and my mother holding hands in a darkened movie theater, their heads close together. Another showed them laughing over wine at a patio restaurant an hour out of town, a place he told me he had to go to for a supply run. The most damning was a long lens shot of my mother at a local charity luncheon, proudly wearing a new glittering diamond necklace, one I knew my librarian salary could never afford, and one Eric certainly hadn't bought for me. It was my inheritance, draped around her treacherous neck. While Mr. Evans gathered the external proof, I continued my own internal work, searching for the one thing that could tie it all together. I found it in a place they never would have thought to look, a place they had likely forgotten existed, my dad's old, dusty desk in the corner of the basement. Tucked away in a folder labeled Household Contracts, amidst old warranties for refrigerators and roofing estimates, was the original paperwork for the sale of my grandparents' old fishing cabin. The sale had happened 10 years ago, but my dad was a pat rat who never threw anything away. Stapled to the back of the sales agreement was a faded bank deposit slip. The funds from the sale, a not insignificant sum, had been transferred directly into a specific savings account. The account number was a perfect match for the joint account Eric and Diane were now using. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down on the cold concrete floor. This wasn't a new plan that started after my father's death. This scheme, this financial partnership, had been going on for years, even when my father was alive. They hadn't just decided to steal my inheritance. They had likely been stealing from my parents all along. My father's unwavering trust in Eric, his constant refrain that he was a good man, had been their cover, their shield. The betrayal was deeper, darker, and older than I could have ever imagined. I carefully documented it, photographed the papers with my burner phone, and sent the images to Sarah. Her reply was swift and cold, arriving in my inbox less than 10 minutes later. Subject, cabin sale. This is it, Olivia. This is the linchpin. This proves long-term, premeditated fraud. This elevates everything from a nasty divorce to a criminal conspiracy. We are no longer just in a defensive position. We are on the attack. The final piece of the strategy came from Sarah during a brief, secure call. She said, "They're greedy, and their guard is down again. It's time to bait the trap. But you won't be the one to do it. You'll have someone else do it for you, someone they'd never suspect." It was time to manipulate the manipulators, using their greatest weakness, their unshakable belief in my weakness, against them. The stage was being set for the final act. The bait had to be subtle, delivered in a way that wouldn't raise the suspicions Eric now harbored after my slip-up about the hotel. A direct announcement from me about finding more money was out of the question. He was watching me too closely for that. Sarah's plan was brilliant in its understanding of family dynamics. We would use the one person they both underestimated as much as they did me. My mother's gossipy, drama-loving younger sister, my Aunt Carol. Carol lived for gossip. It was her currency, her entertainment. She and her mother had a complicated, lifelong relationship, a simmering pot of sisterly affection and bitter rivalry. Crucially, Eric found her intensely annoying and barely paid attention when she spoke, often rolling his eyes or retreating to the garage. She was the perfect Trojan horse, an agent of chaos we could point in the right direction. I called her on a Tuesday evening under the guise of asking her for her famous pecan pie recipe for a library potluck. I knew this was a surefire way to get her talking for at least 20 minutes. After listening to a detailed account of her 3 yapping chihuahuas' latest antics and her complaints about a neighbor, I steered the conversation. Oh, Carol, it sounds like you have so much on your plate. I'm just so overwhelmed myself. Dealing with Dad's estate is like a full-time job. I was in the attic yesterday, going through more of his old boxes, and I found another folder. Something about an old investment portfolio he had, I think, overseas. The lawyer I called said it could be a significant amount, but the paperwork is a complete nightmare. I could practically hear Carol's ears perk up through the phone line. The air crackled with her sudden interest. Overseas? Goodness, Olivia, your father was always so secretive with his money. A significant amount, you say? Are we talking thousands?
I don't know, I said, playing the part of the clueless, overwhelmed daughter to perfection. It's all legal jargon and account numbers to me. It'll probably take months to sort out with all the international red tape. Honestly, it's the last thing I have the energy for right now. I can barely keep up with Mason's school schedule. I let out another long, pitiful sigh, then quickly changed the subject back to the pie. I ended the call a few minutes later, knowing the seed had been planted in the most fertile ground imaginable. The gossip telegraph would be faster than any text message. Less than 24 hours later, Mr. Evans sent me an audio file. It was a recording from the listening device he'd managed to place in Eric's truck during a service appointment. The quality was scratchy with road noise, but the conversation was chillingly clear. It was Eric, on speakerphone, with Diane. Carol called me not 20 minutes after she talked to Olivia, Diane was saying, her voice tight and high-pitched with excitement. Practically bursting. Some secret offshore account of his? Can you believe that old goat hiding money from all of us? Olivia said it could be significant. Don't get your hopes up, Eric grumbled, but I could hear the greed simmering beneath his skepticism. It was a tangible thing. She's probably wrong. The woman doesn't know a stock from a sock. It's probably a $10 savings bond from 1972. But what if she's not? Diane pressed, her voice insistent. What if there's another big payday waiting, Eric? We can't file for divorce now. Not if there's more money on the table. It would look too suspicious. We have to wait. We have to see what this is. You need to get her to show you the paperwork. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of the truck's blinker. Fine, Eric sighed, a sound of pure avarice. We wait. But you tell your sister to keep her big mouth shut. The last thing we need is the whole family knowing about this. They had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. Their own greed had trapped them, forcing them to postpone their plans. Sarah was right. We had bought ourselves precious, invaluable time to finish building our case. But my victory was short-lived, and it came at a price. As the weeks turned into a month, Eric's frustration at the delay began to fester. He started pressuring me about the portfolio, asking to see the documents so he could help me figure them out. I kept putting him off, telling him they were with the lawyer, and it was complicated, since he couldn't take his frustration out on me without a more vulnerable target, Mason. It was psychological warfare, waged with subtle comments and poison suggestions. We were at the dinner table, and Mason was about making the honor roll. "That's great, buddy," Eric said, ruffling his hair with a paternal warmth that was utterly fake. "It's good you have your schoolwork to focus on. Things have been a little tense at home lately. Your mom's been very stressed out, worrying about everything." He shot me a look over Mason's head, a silent warning disguised as concern. Another time, I was walking past the garage and overheard him talking to Mason, who was helping him organize some tools. "You have to be patient with your mom," Eric said in a low, serious voice. "She's not feeling like herself these days. Sometimes she gets confused about things, even imagines things that aren't real. Just be a good boy and help me keep an eye on her, okay? Let me know if she seems sad or says anything strange." He was gaslighting my son. He was actively trying to turn my child into his spy, planting seeds of doubt about my sanity. The fury that rose in me was a white-hot protective inferno. This was a line I hadn't anticipated he would cross. It was a declaration of total war. That evening, I sat down with Mason in his room, surrounded by his posters of astronauts and planets. I knew I couldn't tell him the whole truth. It was too ugly, too heavy for his 11-year-old shoulders, but I couldn't. I would not let Eric's poison take root. "Mason," I began, my voice soft but firm, "I know Dad has been talking to you, saying that I'm stressed or confused.
He looked down at his hands, fiddling with a Lego. He nodded sheepishly. He said to watch out for you. He said you're not happy. I took his chin in my hand and gently made him look at me. Listen to me very carefully. Your father and I are having some very serious adult problems. They have nothing to do with you, and you are not responsible for them. You are loved by me more than anything in this entire universe. But sometimes when adults are unhappy, they say things that aren't fair or true to try and make themselves feel better. My mind is very clear. I am not confused, and I am handling our problems. Do you understand? He looked at me, his young eyes searching my face, and I saw the moment he chose his side. He saw the clarity and resolve I was promising. He nodded, a firm, decisive gesture. I understand, Mom. I continued, my grip on his shoulder gentle but firm. Your only job is to be a kid, to do your homework, to play soccer, and to let me worry about the grown-up stuff. I am your mother, and I will always, always protect you. Can you trust me to do that? I trust you, he said, and the simple, powerful conviction in his voice was all the fuel I needed for the final battle. I left his room that night not just as a woman seeking justice for herself, but as a mother lion defending her cub. They had made a grave, irreversible miscalculation. They had targeted my son, and for that, I would not just make them pay, I would make them disappear. The day of reckoning did not arrive with a dramatic confrontation at a party or a tearful showdown in our living room. There would be no shouting matches, no thrown drinks, no public spectacle for the neighbors to whisper about. Sarah Walsh was adamant about that from the very beginning. Spectacles are for amateurs, Olivia, she told me during one of our secure calls. They're messy and unpredictable. We are professionals. We will execute this in a place where emotion is irrelevant and facts are king. We will do it in a place so cold and boring that it will suck the very air from their lungs. Our chosen turf was a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown office building that specialized in legal mediations. The air smelled of weak burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. The walls were a depressing shade of beige, adorned with generic, uninspired art. It was the antithesis of my cozy, book-lined life, and it was perfect. Divorce mediation was a required step in our state before a case could go to trial. Eric and Diane's new lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Klein, with a shiny suit and an even shinier smile, had pushed for it. His strategy was painfully obvious. Get the hysterical, emotional wife in a room, overwhelm her with legal jargon, and bully her into a quick, cheap settlement before she knew what hit her. They walked in 10 minutes late, a deliberate, petty power move. Eric looked confident, relaxed, even bored, as if this was just an annoying errand he was running. He was dressed in a crisp shirt, trying to project an image of success and reason. My mother was dressed in an expensive-looking silk blouse and tailored pants, her face a mask of weary condescension, as if my very presence was a tiresome inconvenience she was nobly enduring. They sat opposite us, a united front of treachery.
I sat next to Sarah at a long, polished mahogany table. I wore a simple gray sheath dress, the one I usually wore for important library board meetings. It was my armor of professionalism. I kept my hands folded calmly in my lap, my expression neutral. I looked, I hoped, exactly like the weak, broken woman they expected to see, a woman who could be easily intimidated. I could feel their smugness radiating across the table. They thought this was the end of their troubles. They had no idea it was the end of their world. The mediator, a tired-looking man named Mr. Gable with deep bags under his eyes, laid out the ground rules in a monotone voice. Then he turned to their lawyer. Mr. Klein, perhaps you'd like to begin with your client's position. Mr. Klein stood up, oozing false sincerity. Thank you, Mr. Gable. My client, Mr. Peterson, is here today hoping for a swift and amicable resolution for the sake of the couple's son, Mason. He believes the marriage has unfortunately and sadly run its course. He is proposing a generous 50-50 split of the main marital asset, the family home. In exchange for his larger share of other liquid assets, which he capably managed during the marriage, he is willing to forego any claim on Mrs. Peterson's modest salary. For custody of their son, he believes a joint arrangement would be best for Mason's stability.
It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He made Eric sound magnanimous, reasonable, a pillar of stability. He painted me as a woman with a modest salary who should be grateful for this generous offer. I didn't react. I didn't look at Sarah. I just breathed, slow and even, and waited. The mediator looked at me. "Mrs. Peterson, or Ms. Walsh, would you like to respond?" Sarah gave a slight nod. This was her stage. She remained seated, which was somehow more powerful than standing. It conveyed absolute confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Gable," she said, her voice calm, cool, and as sharp as broken glass. "My client, Mrs. Peterson, is also here to seek a resolution. However, her proposal looks slightly different from Mr. Peterson's." She reached into her formidable leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, 1-inch binder with a heavy black cover. She placed it on the table with a solid, definitive thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room, a punctuation mark at the end of their lies. I saw Eric and Diane exchange a quick, confused look. Mr. Klein's shiny smile faltered for a fraction of a second. This was not in his script. "Exhibit A," Sarah continued, her voice level, "is a full accounting of a joint savings account at First National Bank under the names Eric R. Peterson and Diane L. Albright. An account my client, the sole inheritor of the funds deposited into it, was never made aware of. As you can see from the statements, over the last 3 years, approximately $112,000 of my client's inheritance money was systematically transferred into this account." The color began to drain from Diana's face. Eric's relaxed posture tightened instantly. He sat bolt upright, his casual facade vanishing. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Klein sputtered, trying to regain control. "My client was simply helping his elderly mother-in-law manage her finances. There is nothing untoward here." Sarah didn't even grant him a glance. She placed a second, even thicker binder on the table. The thud was like a gavel calling a court to order. "And finally, Exhibit C. In many ways, this is the most critical. This exhibit contains bank records and property deeds from 10 years ago. It proves that the secret joint account was not a recent invention to help Mrs. Albright. It was, in fact, open to receive the proceeds from the sale of my client's grandparents' cabin, a sale that took place while my father was still alive, and entrusting his son-in-law to handle his family's affairs." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink into the poisoned air of the room. The room was utterly silent. Mr. Klein looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Eric and Diane stared at the 3 black binders on the table as if they were live grenades. The trap had been sprung, the fortress was built, and the cannon was about to fire. The silence in the mediation room was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, weighted with the death of their arrogance. Eric and Diane stared at the 3 ominous black binders, their faces pale masks of disbelief. The entire narrative they had so carefully constructed, the one where I was the weak emotional wreck and they were the long-suffering, reasonable caretakers, had been systematically dismantled, documented, and incinerated before their very eyes. Their lawyer, Mr. Klein, was the first to recover, though his shiny composure was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweaty bluster. "This is an outrage, an ambush. This is completely unprofessional. My clients will not be subjected to these baseless, slanderous accusations. This mediation is over." He started gathering his papers with shaking hands, a clear signal for his clients to flee the disaster zone. "I wouldn't advise that," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. She hadn't moved a muscle. She hadn't raised her voice. Her power was in her absolute stillness. She reached into her leather briefcase one last time and retrieved not a thick binder, but a single slim manila folder. It looked almost insignificant compared to the evidence already on the table. She slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It glided silently and stopped directly in front of Eric. "That," she said, her voice dropping a notch, making it even more menacing, "is a courtesy copy." Eric stared at it as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. His hand trembled as he reached for it. He flipped it open. The single page inside was stark and official. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching in a small, sharp gasp, her eyes wide with a new kind of dread. I knew what was inside. It was the cover page of our final, irrefutable exhibit. It was a formal, time-stamped document bearing the official seal of the county prosecutor's office. That is a copy of the criminal complaint we filed with the district attorney's office at 8:15 this morning, Sarah stated, her voice devoid of all emotion as if she were reading a weather report. We presented them with our evidence binder last week. The district attorney's office found it, and I quote, overwhelmingly compelling. They will be contacting you shortly to arrange your formal surrender. I believe the term the lead prosecutor used was a slam dunk. That was the kill shot. It wasn't the affair, the lies, or even the stolen money that finally and completely broke them. It was the cold, impersonal, inescapable reality of the law. The threat wasn't social shame or a messy divorce. It was prison. Concrete walls, iron bars, a criminal record that would follow them forever. It wasn't about losing a divorce settlement. It was about losing their freedom.
My mother made a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. She sank back into her chair, her perfectly coiffed hair suddenly looking garish, her expensive silk blouse seeming to choke her. All the years of her casual cruelty, her narcissism, her constant, subtle dismissal of me, it all collapsed inward, leaving a gaping, terrified hole where her pride used to be. She looked old and small. Eric's reaction was different, and in a way, more telling. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, sickly gray. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked from the document to Sarah, then his eyes landed on me. They were wide with a genuine, profound confusion that was almost pitiable. He wasn't seeing the meek, broken wife he thought he knew. He was seeing a stranger, a creature of cold, hard angles and impenetrable resolve. He was seeing the woman I had become, forged in the fire of his betrayal. His mouth formed a single silent word, a question that held all of his disbelief. Why? I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and steady, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I spoke directly to him, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of every tear I hadn't shed, every angry word I hadn't screamed. It filled the entire room. Because you told me I wouldn't fight back, I said. You were wrong. The fight, the bluster, the arrogance, it all went out of him completely. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, staring at the criminal complaint that was the tombstone of his life. Sarah stood up, her movements crisp and efficient. Mr. Gable, she said to the stunned mediator, who looked as if he'd just witnessed a public execution, I believe we are done here. My client withdraws any and all settlement offers. All future correspondence regarding this matter will be between our office and the district attorney. Good day. She nodded at me, a small, sharp gesture of dismissal. I stood on legs that felt surprisingly steady. We walked out of the conference room, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their lives. We didn't look back. The heavy door swung shut behind us, its decisive click closing the final chapter of their story. Walking out of the air-conditioned building into the bright afternoon sunlight felt like emerging from a long, dark cave. I took a deep breath, the city air full of exhaust fumes and life filling my lungs. It wasn't a breath of triumph or elation. There was no joy in this, only a grim, necessary finality. It was a breath of peace. The war was over. I hadn't won by screaming or crying. I had won by being quiet, by being meticulous, and by using the very system they were so sure they could manipulate. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They never realized it was the sound of a fortress being built, stone by patient, unforgiving stone.
In my purse, my burner phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in months. I pulled out my real phone, the one I hadn't used for anything important in what felt like a lifetime, and typed back, "More than okay. It's over. I'm free." The aftermath was not a chaotic storm, but a quiet, efficient demolition. With the mountain of irrefutable evidence we had, Eric and Diane had no cards left to play. Their high-priced lawyer, Mr. Klein, whose entire strategy depended on me being an emotional, unprepared victim, dropped them a week after the mediation, citing irreconcilable differences in a terse letter. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. Facing overwhelming proof and the prospect of a lengthy, public, and profoundly humiliating trial, they did the only thing they could. Their new court-appointed lawyers advised them to take a plea deal. Eric pleaded guilty to grand larceny and fraud. He stood before the judge, a diminished figure in a cheap suit, and mumbled his admission of guilt. He was sentenced to 3 years in a state penitentiary. His contractor's license was permanently revoked. His reputation, the one he had so carefully built on a foundation of my father's money and my trust, was obliterated. He was no longer Eric, the successful builder. He was inmate number 734. Diane's fall was, in some ways, even more profound and pathetic. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy and receiving stolen property. Because of her age and lack of a prior criminal record, she received a lighter sentence, 18 months in a low-security women's facility. For a woman whose entire identity was built on social standing, appearances, and the judgment of her neighbors, it was a fate worse than death. The blue-shuttered house, her little kingdom of petty tyranny and prize-winning roses, was sold to cover her legal fees and the restitution she was ordered to pay me. She lost everything. The divorce proceedings were a formality. I was awarded everything: the house that I had made a home, what was left of my father's money, and my own retirement accounts, which, thankfully, they had never been able to touch. The judge granted me sole legal and physical custody of Mason. After reviewing the evidence of Eric's manipulation of his own son and his extensive financial crimes against our family, the family court judge deemed him an unfit parent and terminated his parental rights. There would be no joint custody, no weekend visits, no phone calls. He had not only lost his freedom, he had completely and irrevocably lost his son. The day the final divorce decree was issued, Sarah and I sat in her office, the city skyline spread out behind her. She handed me a check from the restitution fund, the first of many. It was a substantial amount, but it felt like nothing more than paper. The real victory wasn't monetary. It never had been. "You did it, Olivia," Sarah said, a rare, small, genuine smile on her face. "We won," I corrected her, looking at the formidable woman who had become my general. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," she said, shaking her head. "You had the intelligence and the nerve. You just needed someone to show you where the armor was and how to use the weapons. It was always your fight." That evening, I had the most important conversation of all, the one that truly signified the end of the war and the beginning of peace. I sat down with Mason, who was now 12 and had a new, quiet maturity in his eyes. He had been protected from the legal ugliness, but he knew. Kids always know more than we think. They feel the shifts in the atmosphere. I didn't give him the sordid details of the affair between his father and grandmother. That was a burden he didn't need to carry. But I told him the truth in a way I hoped he could understand, a truth built on actions and consequences. "You know, Dad and Grandma went away for a while," I started, my voice gentle. We were in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth. "And I want to explain why, because you deserve to know. For a long time, they were taking things that belonged to our family without asking. They took money that Grandpa left for us, for our future, for your college fund." He nodded, his expression serious as he looked into the flames. "The money from the window." "Yes," I said, my heart aching a little at his memory. "The money from the window. And because what they did was against the law, and it was very, very wrong, there had to be consequences. It's like in school. If you break a major rule, you can't just say you're sorry and have it go away. You have to face the consequences so you understand the gravity of what you did. He was quiet for a long moment, processing it. Then he looked at me, his eyes clear and steady, asking the question that likely had been haunting him. Did you make them go away?
I took a deep breath, choosing my words with the utmost care. I didn't make them do the wrong thing, Mason. They chose to do that, again and again, all on their own. What I did was make sure they couldn't do it anymore. I put a stop to it. I made sure they couldn't hurt us again. My most important job in the whole world is to protect you, and I did that, even though it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. He seemed to understand the distinction. His face softened with a comprehension that was wise beyond his years. He leaned over on the couch and gave me a hug, his arms wrapping tightly around my neck. "You're not weak, Mom," he whispered into my ear. "You're the strongest person I know." Tears pricked my eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were not tears of pain or anger. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. The approval I had spent my entire life desperately seeking from my mother and my husband, I had just received it from the only person whose opinion truly mattered. We had lost a family, the one we thought we had. But in its place, we had found our own, just the two of us. A new foundation, built not on lies or secrets, but on honesty and a quiet, resilient strength. The price of their betrayal had been high, but the value of our freedom, our peace, was immeasurable. 2 years passed. It sounds like a long time when you say it, but it went by in a blur of healing and quiet, steady rebuilding. Life didn't just return to normal. There was no normal to return to. Instead, it blossomed into something new, something better. Our house, once a silent stage for deceit and tension, slowly filled with new sounds. Mason and his friends laughing hysterically while putting video games in the basement. The upbeat rhythm of my favorite 70s soul music playing while I cooked dinner. The simple, peaceful sound of silence itself, no longer menacing, but serene and comforting. I found my footing, not just emotionally, but professionally. At the library, with my newfound confidence, I started proposing new community programs, a coding club for teens, a memoir writing workshop for seniors. The board took notice. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, the head librarian retired, and I was offered the promotion. The board said they were impressed by my leadership and my new, confident approach. My salary increased significantly, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt a sense of true financial independence, earned by my own merit, controlled by my own hand. It was a feeling more satisfying than any inheritance check could ever be. The stolen money was eventually paid back in full through court-ordered restitution from the sale of my mother's house and the garnishing of their accounts. I put every single penny into a new, ironclad trust for Mason's college fund, managed by a reputable financial advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman introduced to me by Sarah. Mason, now a bright, lanky 14-year-old, was thriving. He was at the top of his science class and had developed a passion for astronomy. His walls, once covered with superheroes, were now adorned with detailed maps of the constellations and a poster of the Eagle Nebula. Our relationship, forged in that crisis, was built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect that was stronger than anything I had ever known. We were a team. One rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, a letter arrived. The envelope was thin, cheap, the return address stamped in purple ink from a federal correctional facility. It was from my mother. My hand trembled slightly as I picked it up, a faint, phantom echo of the old fear. I took a deep breath, walked to the kitchen counter, and opened it. It wasn't a letter of apology. It was 4 pages of rambling, self-pitying blame written in her familiar, looping cursive. She wrote about the terrible food, the demeaning work in the laundry, how her life had been ruined by a terrible mistake. She blamed Eric's bad influence and charming lies. She blamed my father for being too controlling with his money, which forced her to seek comfort elsewhere.
She even blamed me for not being more understanding of her loneliness and for airing our family's dirty laundry in public instead of handling it with dignity. There was not one single word of remorse for what she had done to me or to her grandson. The Olivia from 2 years ago would have been devastated by this letter. She would have cried, agonized over the accusations, and felt a fresh wave of guilt and pain, wondering what she could have done differently. But I was not that Olivia anymore. I read the letter from beginning to end, my expression calm. I saw it for what it was. The desperate, pathetic screed of a narcissist who had lost all her power and was still trying to find someone else to blame for the crater she had made of her own life. It had nothing to do with me. It was a reflection of her own brokenness, a deep, dark void I had spent a lifetime trying to fill, a fool's errand from the start. I walked over to the paper shredder in my small home office. I fed the letter into the slot, page by page, and listened to the satisfying mechanical whir as her toxic words were sliced into meaningless, harmless confetti. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a quiet final release. Like letting go of a rope you didn't even realize you were still clutching. She no longer had any power over me. She was just a ghost, and I was no longer haunted. Later that evening, Mason and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the stars begin to appear after the rain. The air was clean and fresh. He was pointing out Jupiter, a bright and steady beacon in the twilight sky. I said, I used to think my inheritance from Grandpa was the money he left me in his will. Mason looked at me curious. What is it then, if it's not the money? I smiled, a real, peaceful smile that reached my eyes and felt warm all over. It was never about the money, sweetie. His real legacy, the real inheritance he left for me, was the daughter who learned to stand up and fight for herself. The woman who learned that her quietness was not weakness and that her kindness did not make her a fool. He left me the strength to become the person I was always meant to be. And that, my love, is the only legacy I care about leaving for you. Not money or a house, but the absolute, unshakable knowledge that you are strong, you are worthy, and you must never, ever let anyone else define your value. He smiled back, that wide, genuine smile that was a perfect copy of my father's, a legacy of true goodness passed down through the generations. I know, Mom. My name is Olivia. I'm 39 years old, and I was betrayed by the two people I should have been able to trust the most in the world. But their attempt to destroy me only served to reveal a strength I never knew I had. They thought my kindness was weakness and my silence was acceptance. They didn't realize they were just giving me the time and the motivation to build my case, lay my trap, and take my life back piece by valuable piece. Thank you all for listening to my story. It's been a long and difficult journey, but sharing it makes the burden lighter and the victory sweeter. For anyone out there feeling unseen, unheard, or underestimated, please know this. You are stronger than you think. Your voice matters. Your worth is not determined by those who seek to diminish you. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise.